Cool. Hi, everyone. Um, Welcome to our industry talk series, everyone, in chat, where we try to get a little insight into what it's like working in the gaming industry, and this time to be a bit more specific, what it's like working for one of the top esports organizations in the world, running and managing it. My name is Cedric. I'm a recent LSE graduate. I was the previous president of LSE's Gaming Society. Used to play a lot of Overwatch, but more into League of Legends nowadays and a bit of Elden Ring slash Lost Ark. Currently, I'm a consultant at LEK in very typical LSE fashion, and I've also been helping out at an esports startup as a social and community manager. I'm joined by my co-host Kieran, who will introduce himself.
Hi everyone, I'm Kieran. I'm a second year accounting and finance student at LSE. I'm the current Gaming Society president, and I started out gaming by playing Pokemon, and here I am now mainly playing Overwatch. Yeah, I play a lot of Ana, a lot of Zen, so if you're a fan of them, I'm your kind of guy. Our guest today is Arnold, currently the CEO of Gen.G Esports, which is a premier organization from South Korea, established in 2017, and they operate a variety of games, including Overwatch and League, as well as Valorant. Arnold's been a part of Gen.G since its very early days and has grown from its chief
Gen.G,
growth officer,
Gen.G.
Gen.G, to
No, Gen.G.
Gen.G.
He's had this issue for
You
I've
like
had
had
this
one
issue,
ages.
job. You had
right?
one job.
Gen.G from its really early days is this like chief growth officer to where he is today. So, yeah, how about we start with your background? Like, where did you really start with gaming?
Or
um,
maybe introduce yourself, I think,
Yeah.
would be.
yeah. For those that don't know, my name's Arnold. I'm the current CEO. So thanks for the intro. Thank you guys for having me. Great to be here. I actually went and studied abroad at LSE for about 1 year, 2005 to 2006. So you guys can do the math and see how old I am. Um, and had a great time. I was in Holborn. I got lucky on the draw for this, so I didn't have to go across the bridge or anything. Yeah, it was very expensive because the dollar to pound was about like 1.9 back then.
Wow.
So it was rough. Anyway, kind of give you guys my background of how I came to be in this seat today. I actually originally was born and raised in Los Angeles. I started my career out of school, actually in investment banking. So I worked at Goldman Sachs right in 2007. I was on the mortgage-backed securities desk, which was basically we were shorting the market while the world was falling apart. And that was kind of like my first exposure to corporate life. Really didn't enjoy it. Just wasn't for me. I kind of give you my background. I grew up very, very, very poor. Only reason I was able to go to LSE and my university in the US was because I got like a full ride for both.
Mm.
Um, and throughout my high school and college days, the reason how I chose a job was I literally made a spreadsheet and I put like dollars worked, like dollars you earn and hours you have to work per week, right? And then I just chose the maximum that I could find, which at that point was mortgage-backed securities fixed income desk at Goldman Sachs, right? Because you don't have to work investment banking or consulting hours, you get paid more, etc. But for the first time, it was great to be able to send, money to my dad and to my family and stuff. But I really didn't enjoy it. It's just like, unless you have a passion for money,
Mm.
finance is not, for me anyway, the thing that got me going. So after 2 years, I did what any business school type of person would do. They said, "Oh, I'm going to find myself. I'm going to do something where I'm going to try to find something that's like more meaningful in creating businesses." And, of course, I chose consulting. So I worked at the Boston Consulting Group for a couple of years. But I quickly
Classic.
learned, for me anyway, that like making a bunch of decks and talking about how to build a business wasn't learning how to build a business.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons why I left. And, anybody that has a question about like some questions there, what made me decide how to leave, and I'm happy to answer that kind of stuff too. I got the startup itch, and actually, I decided to do a startup of my own with a friend of mine, and it was a complete disaster. We basically, I had gone in almost $200,000 of of total debt just because of the startup not working. Right? Clearly, it didn't work. Great experience, learned a lot, but I had to get a real job, and so I worked over at Google. I have worked on the Google Travel product, which is like when you do flight search or hotel search, like Hotels Los Angeles. That little box that pops up, we helped launch that product. Google was amazing. It was incredible. Worked with really smart people, but I'm more of a startup guy. So I actually left and joined another startup, an e-commerce startup that was starting up. So ran that for the US. And did that for a few years. Really enjoyed it. And I actually got an introduction to Kevin Chu, who's the chairman and original founder of the company. And he was looking for somebody that was really into gaming, that had startup experience, and kind of all of the dots really connected at the right moment. So I decided to join when we were starting Gen.G, when we were 4 or 5 people in a conference room in San Francisco, trying to buy Soul Dynasty and the spot there. So that's kind of where I started. The reason why, one funny story is the reason why Kevin even knew I existed was I used to play in League of Legends tournaments at Google, right? And I was kind of the only like senior, mid to senior business guy that like was obsessed with this and playing with all the engineers, right? And so I got this weird reputation as this kid who's like, pretty social and works really hard, but also like really into gaming. And so that's how the introduction happened. I think the peak of my competitive sports slash esports career was that we won intramural basketball and we got third place in intramural League of Legends. So that was unfortunately the peak of my athletic and sports career. But hopefully that gives you guys a kind of a background of how I came to this spot today. One thing I gotta say is that anybody that is looking for a job in gaming, looking for a job in esports, please hit me up. My email is on my Twitter. Always looking to hire. And if anybody that's is in consulting or banking wants to take that next step into startups or tech or gaming or esports, I'm always happy to kind of give advice as well. So it's kind of a passion of mine to help people at least understand like what that jump looks like and kind of weigh the pros and cons.
Awesome.
Cool. Thank you. On that note, then, like, what is your like day to day at Gen.G? What is your job at Gen.G? I get it eventually.
He saved
my,
himself.
my
He saved
number one
himself.
job is to correct people that think we're a character in Overwatch League. So what is my day to day? So you know, uh, it really depends on what's needed in the business on any given day, right? Like, a lot of it could be people management, a lot of it could be working with investors and fundraising, a lot of it could be just making sure that the teams are really given what they need to be successful, and not just the teams on the business side but also on the competitive side, right? So for me there isn't kind of a typical day. I would say there's always a lot of meetings, always a lot of pressure, but I have it a lot easier than I think a lot of other CEOs in that we have a really strong team from top to bottom. And so they carry a lot of the work. And so it's kind of like a league roster, right? Like if you have a really strong team, you can kind of focus on the parts that you're good at,
Yeah.
and not have to focus on the parts that you're bad at. So that's been really helpful for me.
Cool. So, Josh, you want to ask about the league starting? Because
Yeah, I mean, I don't. This was supposed to be a bit more at the beginning. Sorry about the loss today. I think it's been an unfortunate circumstance with everything surrounding COVID and with the quarantining and so on, and not being able to play from what I assume would be home or what would be like in the studio sense. I think just surrounding perhaps more topical question, how has your day to day been affected by the pandemic, and how has that really affected esports? We've seen that in some spaces it's kind of boomed. For example, streaming, not necessarily like the esport aspect of streaming, but the gaming aspect of it. But in other places, it makes it more difficult to compete. There's no live audience anymore. There's all that type of restriction, which makes it more difficult. So has that really struck a different chord, or have you had to adapt in a very specific way in the industry?
You know, I would say if we compare our industry to any other industry, COVID hasn't really affected us, right? Of course, it's affected us deeply, and we can't do offline, we can't do events, we can't do all of these things that were kind of the lifeblood of our business. But at the end of the day, you could still have matches, right? You could still
Yeah.
play online. The business kept going, right? And in some ways, viewership actually grew, and everybody learned what Twitch was, right? I remember I have a passion for music, and I remember like I would see like one or two DJs and producers on Twitch, but now every DJ, every producer is on Twitch, right? Like at least the young ones that know what they're doing. And like big celebrities come on Twitch regularly, and it's not some like weird platform. I mean, it is kind of a weird platform still, but so I think in a lot of ways, esports was able to kind of get through the pandemic a lot better.
Hmm.
But I think the hard part for me, and this is more of a different side, is that I honestly think it was really hard for employees,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
I think about just how hard it is when you're first starting your career and you're not able to make friends with a bunch of people at work,
Hmm.
right? Like
Mhm.
that's really hard. Or when you're first starting your career, because we have a lot of young people in our organization, and I remember I learned a ton just by being around people,
Right.
seeing how they're acting, seeing who's prepared and who's not prepared. Like you soak in so much in that first 1 or 2 years, right?
Mhm.
Um, and I wasn't, I saw that a lot of folks kind of stalled in their growth and development, no matter how high potential they were, right?
Mhm.
And now they have to kind of restart that thing again,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
The other and more human part too is that like, look, guys, like the first 2 years, first 4 or 5 years out of school, like it was the first time I've ever had money in my entire life. I
Right.
was going crazy. I would go out every night, Thursday, Friday, Saturday at the club. No tables because I was on an analyst salary,
Yeah.
but like
Not that much yet.
I would go out till 2,
Soon.
3 a.m., get to work by 6 a.m., drink 2 coffees, and be ready. Right? Like that was kind of like what you did. But so you always had that release, no matter how stressful work was. But you don't really have that, right? So I think the human toll is one that we're just starting to feel.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Um, and I'm actually of the belief, and a lot of folks will disagree, and everybody's built different, but I actually believe that people are gonna embrace wanting to come back to work,
Right.
at least on some
Yeah.
sort of flex schedule. So
Yeah.
for us, we do like a 2 or 3 day in the office every week,
Yep.
and then the other two
Mhm.
or three days kind of more flex. And I think it's one of those things where people don't like it because they have to show up to the office now, but over even though short term they don't like it, like they actually feel more fulfilled and happier. And I know I sound like some really old boomer being like, "Oh, you're fulfilled and
Yeah.
happier because you're in the office," but it's true. Like you want to have somewhere where you can be around other people. If you
Yeah.
don't have that
Yeah.
separately, right? At the same time, some people prefer full remote, and
Yep.
that's them, right? And,
Mhm.
and so what I'm saying, this is more from what we're seeing among our employee base and what they prefer.
Was that something that you kind of seen as a pattern before the pandemic, or is that something that's really only majorly fleshed out during the pandemic? Is like a looking for a
I
flexible
think
work week.
before we just took it for granted that people had to show up,
Hmm.
and a lot
Yeah.
of the connections and learning just happened naturally, right? So now what we have to do is be more concerted and directed, or concentrated and directed in how people learn, right?
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
offering specific online courses. We have something called a growth fund that we
Mhm.
do,
Yeah.
because for us, like our mission is to kind of change the game. Like we always love the fact that we're kind of changing the industry from our own angle and how we approach things, right?
Hmm.
Mhm.
So good example would be we were the first organization in Korea that I know of where we actually separated work and life, right? Where we have like a training
Hmm.
facility. We
Mhm.
gave every single one of our players personal trainers and sports psychologists. And, I tried my best to adjust their diet, but they refused. But, we keep trying. Um, so for me, it was really important that we are able to kind of embrace change and growth. So we provide everybody in our organization, whether they're in China, Korea, or the US, $250 every year to go and try to grow and change something about yourself. No
Right.
Mhm.
questions asked. Whether it's you want to learn how to, play violin, or you want to learn how to code, or you want to learn how to be an Instagram influencer, so you need Gucci shoes. Like we don't care, right?
Wow.
Um, what we do say, make it public, and let
Right.
us know how it worked at the end of the year, right? Did you actually do
Mhm.
more Instagram posts? What's your follower growth? Like, what actually really happened, right? Let's give me 1 second. I just gotta plug in my headphones.
No worries.
No worries. I think just a side note, Lester Lady Perks. Well, Lady Perks is in the chat, and she mentioned that, sir, you are not an old boomer. So I think that's just a nice comment to have from there. But yeah, sorry. Continue to go on.
So one of the things I noticed when I was learning a little bit more about the company was a bit about the foundation scholarships.
Which company are you talking about?
Gen.G in this game.
Oh, he pronounced
Got
it
it this time.
correctly. Let's go.
About like the foundation scholarship scheme you have going, and I was curious to learn a little bit more about that because I know we have some players here who are a bit younger. They're not quite yet in university, and I know a few of them are looking at the US. So, what is it, and what sort of inspired the company to kind of follow that path?
Yeah, so education is actually a huge passion of ours. We think it is kind of an opportunity where it's a really fast way and a very strong ROI kind of way for anybody to be able to, you know, change the game as it were, or to be able to kind of really build this community of people that can make an impact on the industry, right? And so what happened was we would go and I entered the esports industry. Uh, for people that know me, they'll know I'm pretty honest. Like the talent was shit, right?
Mhm.
The average level of talent that I saw in esports was horrendous. And I was like, guys, we gotta get better people in this industry if we're gonna be anything,
Right.
right? And you know, of course, there's the aspect of like go and recruit people that are already like well trained and all of these things, but there wasn't really anybody that was helping at that point anyway, kind of create that next level of talent and the next generation of talent that needed to be there for this industry to be successful, right? And I'm not saying all talent was shit. There were incredible people in esports, but I felt that we need to kind of level up the entire industry if we're going to have any
Right.
kind of shot, right? Because people forget that like we are in the entertainment industry and it's a competition for eyeballs, right? And so if you're
Yeah.
not executing, if you're not building, if you're not innovating, you're going to lose, right? Um, and you know, for us, we really wanted to try to figure out, hey, let's create the scholarship fund. So we dedicated $1 million, $100,000 every year to give out, let's say, 10 scholarships to people that come from kind of more diverse backgrounds, right? Whether it's racial or whether it's low income. We really wanted to kind of have this industry up level the talent and diversity that needed to be there, right? And, you know, one thing that I realized was like I thought it was kind of weird where a lot of League of Legends teams have so many Asians on the roster, but a lot of the people running the organization and you know making all the decisions didn't look like the people on the team.
Right.
And I thought that was really strange, right? And so a lot of these things that I think about is like, yeah, it's yes, it's and I'm more of the kind of the camp of less about oh you're wrong, you're bad, and all of that stuff. But I think about it more as like, all right, the world is the world and it is the way it is. What can we do to actually grow the industry in the right way so that it can be a more open industry, so that more opportunities are created rather than just being angry all the time on Twitter, right?
Yeah.
Like you guys will know me. Like I think just having good intentions and being very idealistic is like not my style, right?
Yeah.
I'm much more of like, all right, how can we actually have impact in and support the things that we believe in, right? And that's kind of my angle. Like I don't really see the point in getting angry at people, especially on Twitter.
Yeah.
I just feel like it's very unproductive.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you know, God bless them. A lot of people love just being angry on Twitter. So
Yeah.
I understand. Different different ways of approaching life, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Feels like almost like a universal constant for people to be angry on Twitter. Do
Yeah.
you see that like the talent now is sort of fleshed out and been a little bit better than it was in the past, or is it still in the esports sphere? Is it still quite like low grade? Do you think that the scholarship is funding for like the next 10 years, or is it something where like a lot of the esports industry is kind of like caught up to what its original intentions are?
The talent is much better. And I've noticed that even from you know when I joined about 5 years ago or so. Um, the biggest difference is that it was good enough to be just passionate, right?
Mm.
Actually, this is good advice for folks that are looking to break in, right? Like, I hate folks that email me and are just like, I'm super passionate. I
Yeah.
want a job in
Yeah.
esports. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, that's cool. I'm really passionate about basketball. Does that mean I'm going to be drafted by the Lakers? Like, that doesn't make any sense, right? Like, you got to bring something to the table,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like, that's the biggest change that happened. 10 years ago, nobody was passionate, nobody knew about esports, so passion was enough,
Mhm.
right? Willingness to show up and do the work was enough. But now you gotta bring something to the table, especially if you want to join, an organization of your choice, or a publisher of your choice. Like, you really gotta, whether it's you come in and say, look, I am an incredible finance person, or
Mhm.
I am an incredible social media person. Here's my portfolio, right? Like, you gotta actually have something, right? And now I'm noticing more and more people that realize that, hey, how it works to get a job in a competitive market is you bring a portfolio with you,
Mm.
no
Mhm.
matter where you're at, right? So I, for instance, I get a lot of folks that saying like, oh, I love social media, I love the memes, I want a job in marketing and social media. And then I ask, okay, what account do you manage? Let
Yeah.
me see what you did.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, I don't have one. And I'm like, well,
That's
what,
so difficult.
does it cost money to start a Twitter account now? Like, why don't you just start one
Mm.
and just start memeing and see if you can get a following, right?
Mm.
Like these are
Mhm.
the kind of things that I wish people had told me when I was in school,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like, one of the reasons why I was able to get a job at Goldman, because I went to Boston College, and Boston College is not like the number one recruiting spot in Boston for Goldman Sachs, right? The only reason I was able to get the job was as soon as I entered, I made that stupid spreadsheet of where to get a job. Every day I read the FT, read the Economist, read the Wall Street Journal, and then just started building a portfolio of every investment, writing thesis of like which investment was right, which one was wrong.
Mhm.
So I had a portfolio to bring. So as long as I got the interview, I was better prepared and had more to show than the other kid who was maybe same GPA at Harvard, right?
Mhm.
Mm.
So it's like people forget that, like, look, unless you're going to graduate top of Harvard, right? Um, GPA is not good enough,
Yeah.
Yeah.
right? And so you just got to bring something to the table, and I really think it's not that hard. It's just that
Mhm.
people don't know they have to do it.
It's
Yeah.
kind of an information issue as opposed to like a deliverables issue.
Yeah, the Twitter's not that hard.
Yeah,
It's
I
just
think on that point, I've seen a lot of these people, even interacting with people like Carlos from G2. I'm not sure if you've heard like Fosty, and then there's also Kingslayer, especially working within the LEC. They've made a name for themselves. They grew from like 200 followers to thousands and thousands. I think they're both over 15,000 followers now, just for making memes and literally just interacting maybe once a good like once one good meme during the week, and then interacting very heavily during LEC times for League of Legends. And from that they just grew a following and managed to get a job. Fosty's at Excel, and Kingsley I think is working for Fellow Kids, which is like some sort of contractor for the LEC social media team. So it's definitely, to your point, bringing that portfolio or just experimenting, I think would be that's really good advice. I feel experimenting a lot, like you say, on free platforms such as Twitter. I
Yeah.
mean, it doesn't cost. You can make a meme in Paint, and those memes are probably even better than the ones you make in Photoshop. So,
when I did my investment portfolio, I didn't have a single dollar, so it was all make believe money,
yeah,
Yeah.
and you had to keep track of it, and internet kind of sucked back then, so it wasn't as easy.
yeah.
On that kind of like on that work note, did you find many difficulties transitioning from like university into the kind of world of work? Like going straight into kind of the consulting industry, was there a major divide between the university kind of workload and what was expected of you versus going into
Yeah,
work?
I remember talking about this even before we started.
Yeah.
Like, I thought I was busy in university, right? Because I had a very I was like very work hard, play hard style.
Mm.
So
Mhm.
I would I would go to class. After every class, I would go straight to the library, and spend like 4 hours there,
Mhm.
and just like do whatever I needed to make sure I got it. And then at every Thursday, Friday, Saturday, I would go out, right? Like, and pregame and all of that kind of stuff. Um, so I think for me, I thought I was busy, but I really wasn't,
Mhm.
right? Especially if you are going to go all in on really making sure that your career is successful. Because
Mm.
the first thing you realize is that as soon as you go into a competitive environment at work, you recognize that like there's somebody out willing to outwork you,
Mhm.
but also somebody that's 5 times smarter than you, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have to really find your angle. It's not good enough just to work hard and be smart. You got to find your angle of how you can be successful. So, good example, I remember when I first started at Goldman, there was like this like math placement test, right? And I remember going to that test and I was like, dude, I'm gonna ace this. Like it's gonna be so easy. And
Famous last words.
Yeah.
and I remember going, and 10 minutes, it's an hour-long test, right? And
Wow.
10 minutes in, this kid is like, "Oh, this is so boring," and just leaves, right? And I was like, "Who's this guy?" And then, I finished the test pretty early, 45, 50 minutes. I did pretty well on the test.
Mhm.
Not the top score or anything, but, pretty well. Um, and then I find out that that kid that left in 10 minutes actually a freaking math genius from Caltech. He had the top score, and he was just done in 10 minutes, and he thought it was stupid. But the
Amazing.
difference was he was also a really hardworking guy who was
Right.
also like really athletic and social and just like I was like, wow, okay,
Yeah.
guess what? This is the
Mhm.
real world. There are incredible people out there. If you want to be successful, like hard work is table stakes, right?
Mhm.
And there's a decision that you have to make as well of like how important it is career success is, right? Um, for some people, it's not that important. And like I feel that companies and organizations should be respectful of that, right?
Mhm.
Not everybody is psycho like me and just like, willing to just go crazy and be single and no kids at 36 because of work, right? like it's different, right? And one great piece of advice that I got was, you know, you should never let you need to design your life the way you want to. Otherwise, somebody else will design it for you, right?
Mhm.
So, great example, Cedric, of what you're probably going through is somebody else is designing your life for you and telling you how much you need to work and what success is, right? But
Yeah.
like you personally have to define what success is for you. And is it working at Google and drinking kale smoothies and having a 5-hour workday? Or is it, just being at the top, in consulting, being a partner and, making more money and, having a great home in Manhattan or London or wherever you want to live, right? Like it, it's really about figuring out what you want and understanding what it takes to get there.
Mhm.
Um, what I find and that I get frustrated with is some people get the notion of I deserve this, I
Mhm.
deserve that. And
Right.
then they find the circle of people on social media, on Twitter, that will support them in thinking they deserve things.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Um, it's really important that like you find what is important for you, you understand what it takes to get there, and then you go do it.
Mm.
Kind of relying on the
Mhm.
goodwill of a boss or goodwill of a company.
Yeah. Never.
It's just there. It's not like it's not the right path. And
Right.
even for our employees, when they want my support. I'm there to support, but I'm not there to do the work for them,
Mm.
Mhm.
right? And I've always been super supportive when people work in our organization and they decide they want to do something else. Like I'm always very supportive of like, hey, like I want to help you get there,
Yeah.
right? Because like for me, it's just about how can you help people find where they feel like they need to be at that moment in time in their development growth, in their development curve, which is very different for every single person, right? And it's
Mhm.
very similar to like pro players, right? Like some pro players, like I don't know a single pro player that doesn't grind, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's also pro players that grind super hard but they don't make it, and there's also pro players that are super talented but they grind even harder, and you're like, man, this guy's crazy, right? Like the Kobe Bryants of the world, right?
Yeah.
um and so, that would be kind of my advice, is that, everybody should figure out how to design their life. And if you don't do it, you'll get carried away by either social media designing what they think your life should be, or your boss defining it, and then you'll kind of regret that amount of time where you didn't actually go into action and define it for yourself.
Mm. Wow. Those are some inspirational words.
It's good because I actually didn't invent those words. It was from like somebody way smarter than me, so I just like stole it. So.
Oh, nice.
Easy
Nice.
peasy.
You didn't have to say that. You didn't have to say that, Arnold. Otherwise, we're just
Keep the trade
accredited to
secret.
you. Yeah. But yeah, I
So-
think, sorry.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to say, I think, yeah, as mentioned in the chat, Lady Perks mentioned that there should be an emphasis on finding happiness, I guess, within oneself. And I guess it depends on how you define that happiness or define that success, but definitely not focusing on what other people put value on, because I guess that will kind of pigeonhole yourself or narrow your view onto what you feel is valuable, whereas it might not actually be what you actually feel is valuable, if that makes sense. So I think that's definitely related to what we just spoke on, and definitely true.
Yeah, like on that note, given that like the pro player scene, unless you're Faker, right? Once you reach a certain point, right, most pro players tend to sort of burn out and then try and find a new industry. Is there much that you can kind of see within the gaming industry to kind of like pivot like ex-professional players into still working within the esports in esports scene? And like to that effect, like where do you see kind of esports developing in terms of the job market from here?
So, wait, tell me the question again. So it's like, how
So,
can
like-
pro players move into the esports industry?
So like if they're at the point now where they can no longer play at the kind of professional peak level, is there a kind of position where you can sort them like see them beginning to fill like the content creation side of things? Is that kind of something you believe is something they can
Yeah.
do, or
No, look, honestly, you'll make more money being a content creator than you would being an esports pro, right? Like, I mean, the reality is the reality, right? Look at any esports broadcast versus look at XQC's broadcast, and you see where the eyeballs are, right?
Yeah.
And that's just the reality, right? Like, we thought esports would dominate gaming, but it doesn't. That's a lot of these content creators, right? And so you see a lot of the smarter orgs actually start citing content creators and sponsorships based on content creators, right? And that's kind of where the industry's going. So, I'll tell you about what we've done to try to help and make a dent. So for me, like it's the same theme that you're gonna see continuously. It's like I want an accurate and realistic read of where the market is and what the industry looks like. Like I always say, like I don't want my biases and how I want the world to be to cloud what is actually going on, and having an accurate assessment of what the right moves are, right? Because my job is to not be angry that the world is one way or another. My job is to understand what it looks like so that we can make the best decisions that we can. And at the same time, if we want to try to navigate it in a way that I feel like is responsible, and kind of shape how we want the industry to look like that's kind of my job, right? So, we noticed this from the beginning, and one of the first things we did was we wanted to kind of be that first offer for a lot of pros, especially ones that have had long careers with us. And people like Ambition, Cuvee, like those guys like were lifers with our organization, and we wanted to kind of at least be their first offer as a content creator, because a lot of MCNs and these kind of places wouldn't give them an offer because they were like, I don't know what your stream numbers are like, so you have to wait. Versus we were saying, hey, you know what? As you transition, we want to try to set it up so that at least you can have a good transition, right? Now it gets trickier because some people transition and they fail, right?
Yeah.
And I don't believe in just continuing to hand out checks just because we liked you when you were a pro, right?
Yeah.
So for me, it's I want to provide them the opportunity. And if they blow up, they blow up, and we try our best to continue to keep them, and hopefully they resign with us, etc. Right? The other is we've had coaches that have actually moved into operations roles,
Right.
And so that's been really helpful. We want content creators that want to be talent managers for content creators, right? And I want to try to create that. And the other is actually there's a lack of good coaches in the industry. So we actually have a program where we help, students that want to get better at at gaming, and they just want to be a good coach, kind of get their first footing as a coach, training, really young students that want to just get better at the game, kind of like a summer camp kind
Mhm.
of situation,
Yeah.
not like a pro level situation, right? So I think there's a lot more work still to be done
Mhm.
because, to be honest, a lot of pro players, when they end their career, even if they were relatively successful,
Mhm.
don't know what to do next.
Mm.
And there
Yeah.
isn't really many skills that are that transferable
Mm.
Mhm.
immediately, right? And so that transition, I think, is going to be really important, and it's something that, hopefully we can do more about. I mean, nobody's worried about Chovy. Like, he'll be fine. He
Sure.
has a nice little nest egg,
Still
but
very
there's a lot
young.
of other players that are still, you know, at the pro level or very close to pro level that never get that lifelong bag that allows them to just do whatever they want for the rest of their life, right?
Yeah,
So
Mhm.
for sure.
Is that something you see kind of like beginning as a key kind of thing in the next 5 years? Is that like a really long term goal in the industry is managing professional players? Is it like a something you see sort of long term solution being generated for soon, or is it kind of always a work in progress?
I think it's going to be always a work in progress. If you look at any other traditional sport, it's still a work in progress, right?
Mhm.
Look at the NFL, look at the NBA. A lot more still needs to be done. Some baseline things like I think the league could come in. And I've always said, like, if we're gonna do a salary cap and do all of those things, then like a salary cap for the top players and that kind of stuff is not where my concern is. I think
Mhm.
that's just more of like, what will the industry work? What's the revenue share? All of that, more business terms. But like, I feel like the leagues should also be responsible and figure out, hey, how do we create a pension plan for all the kids that aren't Chovy,
Yeah.
Yeah,
right? What do they get? Because a lot of kids that have done this for years and years and years, like their whole like wrist is screwed up, man,
yeah,
right? Because
Mhm.
they're playing like, so a lot of them aren't even playing in kind of like the ergonomic way. They're playing kind of like this, or they've never worked out and they've never like taken care of their bodies. So I mean, it's not as harsh as the NFL or UFC or boxing or those kind of
Yeah.
things. Like, let's
yeah.
not kid ourselves. But I think it's going to require teams doing more, the leagues doing more,
Mm.
hopefully
Mhm.
publishers stepping up and doing more. I don't think any like one team or one organization can change the game alone.
Mhm. Is that like a perspective a lot of teams are seeming to have? I know like at Gen.G there are like professional physiotherapists and like professional trainers for like pro players, but is that something you see a lot of orgs doing, or are you kind of like the only one in the industry that's kind of looking to support players like that and teach them how to look
Uh,
after themselves?
it's kind of binary,
Mhm.
right? I think some of the top orgs are doing it,
Mhm.
but a lot of them aren't, just because they don't have the funds or those kind of things. So
Mhm.
it's hard to judge them as like, oh, we're so moral and they're
Yeah.
not, because a lot of it is more the fundamental problem of esports and not being, and the business model not working,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
There just isn't enough money to go around,
Yeah,
right?
Mhm.
And I think we saw the good go-go days where a lot of investment came in, so organizations were fine and there was always more money to be had.
yeah.
Mhm.
But one thing that I will say, and this is probably bad for us as we're recruiting, is like the winter is coming, right? And you're going to see a lot of organizations go bust. So basically, what I predict is the top organizations will survive and thrive.
Mhm.
The bottom organizations will be fine too, because it's just like five dudes, in a house, and
Yeah,
they make
Yeah.
money off prize winnings, right?
yeah.
Everybody in the middle, I don't think they survive,
Mhm.
right? And I think we see a complete shift of how the industry works. It's not going to be based on prize money. I actually believe it'll be on digital skins. There could be some opportunities in Web3, which I know is like a bad gamer word these days. Um, but I think one of the reasons why so many publishers, esports leagues, esports teams are looking to Web3 is because they recognize that the current business model just doesn't work,
Mhm.
right?
Mm. Yeah.
And I thought it was really interesting where we have a Web3 partner or crypto exchange partner in BitThumb, right?
Mhm.
And that's like the number 2 or 3 exchange in Korea.
Mm.
I thought the reaction was very funny between like our Korean fan base and then our more Western fan base, right? I don't know if funny is the right word, because I think the concerns that they're bringing up are valid and need to be solved,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
But I just thought it was interesting seeing the reaction coming from more of our Western fan base that was upset about, obviously, the environmental impact is a serious one. We do need to move. The industry needs to move more quickly there. Um, but at the same time, the reaction from the fan base in Korea was more like, well, how else are you going to afford Chovy? Because the business model doesn't work otherwise.
Yeah.
So right now, where a lot of teams are stuck is they either have to hope and take the money from a lot of these Web3 partners and try to figure out there's a new business model that can actually work that's digital, whether it's collectibles or something else,
Mm.
or just say like, look, we're gonna let the LPL assign all of our top league players, and we're just gonna be at the bottom of the team of the stack, being Fred Brion and spending no money and just chilling, waiting for our check at the end of the year.
Yeah.
It's a tough decision.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't think there's a right or wrong. I'm trying my best to navigate it, but
Yeah.
I struggle with it every day, right?
Yeah.
As you know, as a tech bro, like who's really into tech and who's been into kind of this space for a long time, I also recognize there's a lot of BS and scams and
Yeah.
stuff
Yeah.
that's
Rug
just
pulls and everything
absurd.
every day.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
And so, you know, my advice here is hopefully people take it to heart. You should be extremely cautious and scared and operate out of fear when it comes to investing your money into this space.
Mm.
At the same time, everybody here should be the opposite when in terms of being extremely aggressive in wanting to learn about the space,
Right.
right? Because the first person that knows how to navigate this space successfully is going to get so many benefits, whether it's helping people avoid the scams or whether it's finding an opportunity that's actually legit and that actually is a preview of how the technology can evolve, right?
Mm.
And I'm a boomer, so I know this story. Like, there was this internet company during like the dot-com boom, way in the 90s. I know it's a long time ago. Their company, and they got millions of dollars of funding, was back in the day, the laundromats, you'd have to put quarters in.
Yeah.
Uh, and so there was this company where you pay them $20 and they give you $19 of quarters delivered to your house.
Wow.
Millions of dollars. Clearly, this company is terrible, right?
Yeah.
But out of the dot-com boom also came Amazon, also came a lot of
Yeah.
these other
Yeah.
companies, right? And so, don't let all the Twitter noise make you not want to embrace learning what you should do for your career, right?
Mm.
Because Twitter's not going to help you pay the bills,
Yeah.
but you can figure out what's right for you, what your stance is, and have like more independent thought rather than just figuring out which team you belong on,
Yeah.
right? And I think that's so important, especially the environment right now where there's so much noise. And it's just so important that you have a really strong clarity of independent thought, because that's the only way you can really design the life that you want for yourself instead of getting caught up in what people should tell you you should like or not like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
Thank you. We have a few questions from like some of the audience, which I prepared in advance. One of them was about like the kind of West versus East divide in terms of the infrastructure and the acceptance level of esports as a whole. Do you think that like the West, as it currently is sort of destined to always be behind the East in terms of infrastructure and acceptance, or is it over time? Do you think esports is going to become more and more of like an acceptable kind of not just industry, but if you want to be professional in it, similarly expected as it is in the East?
Um, I think this question simplifies it too much, right? Because if you look at Valorant, the competitive scene's out West much more so than it is in East, right? And then I also sometimes don't know where West and East is defined as, because I'm like, from LA, Korea's in the West.
Yeah.
So but I'll tell you a couple of things that I recognize as advantages versus disadvantages of both markets, right? So in Korea, obviously the PC cafe infrastructure is a big game changer, right? And the internet infrastructure is a big game changer, right? So I say that because I look at the average esports player that comes from the US in the US scene. And for those that don't know, we have a couple teams in Los Angeles, and we have a few teams out in Korea. We're looking to expand more both out west. And as more games come and all of that stuff, we'll do more expansion out in Asia. Um, but one thing that I've noticed is the average kid that comes in as a esports player in America, usually upper middle class, right? And a lot of that is because the barriers to entry into that game, you need a high-powered PC, you need a high-powered monitor, you need fast internet, you need enough spare time, or your parents allow you to do this and you're not working after school. Like, you need all this stuff, right? In Korea, it's actually the opposite, where it's a lot more lower income, lower middle class, very rarely upper middle class, right? Because if you're upper middle class and high class, like, usually your parents have you going to after school programs and paying a ton of money to get better grades, right?
Into a good uni.
Exactly. The other part is also the fact that in Korea, the PC cafe infrastructure allows anybody to plug in and just play, right? Similar to the way like basketball would work, right? And you just show up to the hard top, right? And then you play, right? And so, if I look at that disparity of, hey, there is actually differences in terms of the infrastructure and what that enables, right? So there's the infrastructure level. There are some advantages still out in the US of, a lot of US universities offer scholarships. There isn't a single Korea university right now that offers a scholarship for esports. But one thing that I'm excited about is actually we're changing that. Like, we actually started a class with Yonsei University, which is like the one of the top schools in Korea. So this thing takes time, man. Like, it's been 5 years. Like, that was a dream of mine, and we have like one module now after 5 years of working on it.
Taking a while.
So it's a little different pace than a startup. So there are some advantages, and there's a lot more capital here in the US. Sponsorship dollars are bigger, content creator dollars are bigger. So there's much more money and capital flowing out in the West, right? And then final point is the part that I do recognize and I have to admit is real. That kid that I notice, whether they're pro, semi-pro, amateur, that kid grinds in Korea.
Right.
Like, to the next freaking level, right? And a lot of even pros in North America that I've noticed don't, right? Now, at the same time, this is what I say, like, it's not right or wrong. It's which life do you want, right? Do you want to live in LA, beautiful weather, LCS, eat amazing Korean barbecue or Mexican food or Italian food, show up for scrims, maybe do some solo queue, and you still are working your ass off compared to the average person, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So don't get me wrong, like, the hours put in by the average LCS pro, ridiculous. Just like the average hours put in by the average NBA player is freaking ridiculous, right? But in Korea, it's like the same. I'm a huge basketball fan. Like, remember all the stories about Kobe Bryant?
Yeah.
Like, those kind of stories exist in Korea much more often, right?
Yeah.
So a great example is Ruler, right? And I remember when this was in 2018, a terrible year for us where we got knocked out. And the next day when we arrived back in Seoul, I see him in the office, man. I'm like, what the hell is he doing? What are you doing in this training center? He's like, I just need to go back and just start practicing.
Yeah. Wow.
This is the day after, right? And I was like, we're not even gonna watch like the rest of the playoffs first, And he told me, like, for me, this was kind of how I could escape my family out of poverty. Like, this is the thing, right? This is the only thing that I want to build my life around. And I was like, look, you should be healthy. You should think about working out. And he's actually working out now, listening to me a little bit more, and I think controlling his diet a little bit more. And I don't think he has a girlfriend, which, he probably should get one. And but
That's
so
the
for
balancing.
me, often I almost think about it as like my job in Korea often is to be the balance to, hey, look, guys, work is work, but you need some life balance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Versus sometimes a lot of my job in the US is helping some certain pros recognize this is a once in a lifetime opportunity.
Yeah.
And that, look, if they really want to get to that next level, at least compared to their North America peers, they should work a little bit harder in order to get there. And so I always say, like, look, I always read Reddit. I'm a big Redditor and big memer and love Twitter. And like people get into arguments about this is wrong, but it's more about, for me, somebody that sees both sides. It's how can we help better enable the choices that people want to make for their career, and not cast judgment on either, but also provide them the tools to at least try to do it and be more successful or be healthier and these kind of things. And so it's more about enabling of choices. But do I recognize that a lot of Korean pros in League especially work harder? Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
They do. And like, so I I have so many stories of LCK pros where they go. I have one where they went to a certain team in the LCS, and the first day he messaged us and he's like, wait, everybody just leaves after scrims. It's like, we don't even do a proper like review. We don't even work on the mistakes. Like, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
And he's like, I don't understand what we're doing here in practice. Right? This is obviously a team that was like really bad. So, you know, the top teams like Cloud9 and, you know, those teams don't do that. And he was just like, I don't understand what we're doing here. Right? Like, show up for a scrim and we just bounce. Versus in Korea, you show up for the scrim, you do the really long review of like what you screwed up on, and then you have to work on what you screwed up on in solo queue to try to get better at that. So there's like a feedback loop that happens in one day. Is it a grind? Is it healthy? I don't know these things, right? And it's rough. It's a lot of work. But at the end of the day, that's the competition, and you're seeing the results and the differences between the two.
Yeah, for sure. I think even in China, it's about the same. I'm not sure if you've heard if it's even worse. I think some sources would say it's
a
worse.
lot of work in China. Hey, when I was at BCG, the projects that I would never take are the ones in Korea.
Yeah.
I was like, there's no freaking way. I remember
it's the culture about working, isn't it?
They would chart out like happiness by country.
Yeah.
And always at the bottom was Korea. Hours were brutal. I think it's gotten a lot better now. There's been a lot more changes with the government coming in and some regulations that I think are actually helpful. So that's positive directionally, but man, it is rough.
Yeah, for sure. I think we have another. We're quite aware of time, but we have another question.
I don't mind going longer. I cleared out some time, so just whatever
cool.
is
Thank you.
good for you
Brilliant.
guys.
Appreciate it. But yeah, so I guess we'll keep going. I have a question from one of the audience, pre-prepared as well, if I may. I think more generally, for people just starting careers, what do you think is the best way to get involved behind the scenes in esports organizations? I mean, this can take various forms, like you mentioned, switching from being a consultant into esports, or just trying to help generally through part-time opportunities. Like, what do you see or foresee as
sorry, I got a little cut off. Like, what's the question?
Yeah, sorry. So this person asked, for people just starting careers, what do you think is the best way to get involved behind the scenes in esports organizations? If they just want to get a flavor of what it's like working in the industry.
Got it. Okay, so I think, especially for smart people, which, you guys are at LSE, you guys are all smart, hopefully. There were some really dumb people. There were some geniuses, and there were some people I was like, man, this guy is definitely like, this guy has a few yachts somewhere.
Wait, why is his name on the library? That's interesting.
Curious.
Just kidding.
I think so. For most smart people, and I've noticed this, right? Especially gamers, they try to think about like the optimal build path, right?
Yeah.
And like playing the perfect league game, right? And so they think, okay, in order for me to get this job, then I need this job and this job and this job and this job, right? And that's how I'm gonna be retire by 25 and then figure out what I really want to do with my life, right? I can tell you now, I think that's the worst approach in the world, right? And you're gonna look back on it and feel like you wasted your life. Because it's more important not freezing yourself in paralysis about what the optimal path is, but more being directionally correct.
Right.
Right. So I remember when, I'm sure you were doing like consulting and you were like, oh, McKinsey, BCG, LEK, like, oh, here's my ranking, here's like what I need to get to, and like all this stuff. It's like, no,
Someone got
but
a
then
hand
you're
on
not
it.
thinking enough
Yeah.
about, you're the same damn job. The differences between like each company is like 10K, or I don't even know what the differences are.
Even smaller in some cases. Like,
Yeah,
Yeah.
like, am I directionally correct?
mm,
Do I really want to do consulting? Is this what I actually really want to do? Right? And even if it's not consulting and you're doing consulting for a company, right, it's still directionally correct, right? And it's more important to know what direction you want to go into and just start making steps in that direction, working your butt off and succeeding in every next step that you take, because then you create more, you are able to accelerate your career and get better and faster towards that goal. And you have to kind of trust yourself that you can kind of figure out that next step, right? Because the world is changing, the movements are flowing. So it's kind of like if you're playing League and you create this optimal path based on what you think that you want to build and not look at and read the map, right? And not read what the other person's, building and all that stuff. Like, that's what people are doing in college.
Yeah.
It's like they built this career path without thinking about how the world is changing, or basically not recognizing that, like, you take this next step, and as long as you're excellent at it, more steps will appear, right? But if you're going in the wrong direction, like I did when I chose investment banking,
Yeah.
I actually to reset my career, right, and go in the opposite direction because it wasn't the direction that I wanted to go in, right? So that's what I really mean by get that direction right. And I don't think people, especially smart kids, think about that enough. And the second thing is to just trust that you're going to work your butt off and be successful in that directionally correct next step to allow you to make that next jump afterwards, right? Instead of freaking out that, like, you didn't get into McKinsey or something, right?
Yeah.
And like, that's something that I was like shocked by. I would meet these kids at both when I was at Goldman, I would meet these kids like bragging about how they're at Goldman. I'm like, dude, this is the same shit as everything else. Like
Yeah.
Morgan Stanley, Credit Suisse, like, it's all the same shit.
Yeah.
And then I would meet people that were like kind of freaking out that, oh, that's McKinsey because we're at BCG, and I was like, dude, guys, like, there's no door that's closed to you because you're at BCG versus McKinsey. Like, are you the best at what you do or not, right?
Yeah.
And like, that's one of those things that I always felt was a really interesting thing, is that you create these things in your head
Yeah.
that
For
like
sure.
aren't actually limiters.
Yeah.
It's just more like, are you going to be the best at it or not,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And if you're the best at it, more doors open for you.
Yeah. I think that's a really like resonating point for a lot of London universities. I say especially LSE, because the culture around investment banking, around consulting. Look at me. I'm like a product of this culture where it's just you're kind of pushed into that mentality, and only like now, like, that part of me is like really wants to break out, and I think that's been an ongoing process, but only now, like, hearing all of these things, experiencing it on the side, and like you say, moving directionally in the right position is where you can really break that mentality. It's really difficult, right? Because you're surrounded by all these people, all these smart people. You're comparing yourselves to them. You want to be like them, or like get that internship like them. So I know it's a tough thing to break out, but it's yeah, like you say.
And for how this applies to esports is like, look, if you're a huge G2 fan and you want to be social media hanging out with Carlos, that's your dream, like, okay, your next job doesn't have to be G2, right? You
Yeah.
could work at Electronic Arts running a social media account for one of their games, selling loot boxes, right? That's
Yeah.
fine. You're directionally correct.
Yeah.
Now, but are you going to be the best and actually make some funny memes about these loot boxes that EA peddles, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or not? And like, that's one of those things also where it's like, look, there are certain things and lines that you have to draw of like morally I will not work at these kind of places, right? Like I wouldn't work at a cigarette company, for
Yeah.
instance, right?
Mhm.
And but at the same time, that's your line that you have to draw for yourself, right? Like I draw that because my dad smoked a lot of cigarettes, had a lot of issues. So I'm like, there's no freaking way I ever want a cigarette company. I don't want a cigarette sponsorship. I don't these kind of things, right?
Yeah.
And luckily, I'm in a position where I can kind of shape the company to align with some of these values that I have,
Yeah.
right? Not all, right? Because it shouldn't just be about my values. It should be what's best for the organization, what provides jobs for the company and the employees and all that kind of stuff. Um, but it's kind of like if you are just so angry about loot boxes that you draw that line and you say, I would never work for Electronic Arts because they peddle loot boxes,
Yeah.
right? I think it's a little short-sighted because if you take a look at where the industry is moving, I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm talking about look at where the industry is moving and going, and are you going to do you really fully understand that stance that you just took, right?
Yeah.
And if you do and you understand it and you want to do it, then I support that 100%. But I see a lot of kids that have all these stances, and then when I dig in to like really see if it's something that they like truly are passionate about, they're not. They just want to join the brigade.
Yeah. The
Yeah.
bandwagon. For sure.
And that's not any way to live life, man. Like it's so important. And this is one of those things that I do for interviews is that when people say they care about stuff, I like dig in a little bit and like see like, do they really care? Why do they care? What's the reason they care? Is it really fleshed out that I have so much respect for it, even if we disagree? But if it's just, oh, whatever is the flavor of the day, then I'm like, man, like it just doesn't, like do the research, do the work, you know?
Yeah.
Sorry, I just sound like such a boomer on this. I
No,
can't
it's
see
so
the
No,
chat, but
no,
they're
no.
like, this guy is like such a old man yelling at the cloud.
No, no, no. I
No,
think
I
it's
don't.
all valuable input. Have to take it from someone that like you've been through all of it, so gotta learn at least.
A
Yeah.
lot of what I say is I had a lot of folks that only said things that were very safe to
Yeah.
me
Yeah.
and
Conservative,
didn't
right?
really put their skin on the line of like telling how it really was
Mm.
when I was in college. I just didn't have I never like I grew up with just my dad in like really shitty part of LA. Like I had zero connections into the business world.
Mm.
Mhm.
Nothing, right?
Mm.
And I didn't get real talk. I got the only business people that I met was through networking events at
Mm.
university. So they didn't really tell me the full story,
Mhm.
right? And so I try my best now, even if it's a little bit kind of brash or assholey or whatever, of just like at least being the voice that's like trying to be one voice that's trying to like at least keep it real a little bit,
Yeah.
Yeah.
just because I think it's important to, and it's just one opinion, right? Like a lot of people have different opinions, and you can kind of figure out like what your opinion is just by talking to a lot of folks.
Yeah.
Mhm.
For sure.
That's why I think what you guys are doing with these podcast things are great, and I wish I had more of these types of resources, when I was going to uni, but
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I remember like going into sort of even looking at like what university do I want to go to. That kind of static. What's my plan? What am I going to look to do? Was definitely like on my mind, and even from a young age, it's like, what do you want to do? Where do you want to go? But if you don't have that kind of directional like dynamism to it,
Mm.
it's going to go wrong. I have one like question of my own, which is a bit about how how do you look at the sort of centers of esports as they are right now? Like I remember watching a previous interview with you where you said the kind of like key esports hubs was LA, Shanghai, and Seoul. Is there anything in those like specific areas where you think like that's the reason they are the sort of key parts of the esports industry, and like where do you see that going from here on out?
um, I actually really like this question because there's a disconnect that we're facing within the gaming and esports industry, right? Um, One of the things is that if you look at where the trends are and where gaming is moving and where the dollars are, right?
Mm.
Mobile games,
Yeah.
Asia, right?
Mhm.
specifically China,
Yeah.
right?
Massive.
For gaming in general,
Yeah.
right? And esports to me is a subset of gaming, right?
Mhm.
And it always will be. So if you think about it like that, right? That's where the dollars are. That's where the movement is. That's where games will develop for. That's how they'll patch for, right? Like they will optimize. The industry will optimize towards where the biggest markets are. It's just always the way it's been, right? But if you look at a lot of young people today, they consume their news on a lot of channels that Asia doesn't even participate in, right?
Mhm.
If I think about the centers of esports like Shanghai, Seoul, nobody's on Twitter, right? But we get all our news and all our drama based on Twitter feeds. Right? I freaking love it, by the way. I'm like
Yeah.
reading all the Twitter
Same.
stuff. I
Same.
think it's so funny.
Yeah, it's so
But
good.
like you also have to recognize that like you're getting a lot of noise and you're only getting a signal for one small subset of the market,
Mhm.
right? And you can't allow that to be the rest. So good example is if you actually read about Square Enix, right, and how they make their money. Final Fantasy is not how they make their money, right? I mean, with the multiplayer game they do, but like I'm talking about the classic console Final
Right.
Fantasy stuff.
Yeah.
What they do is they build that IP and then they sell all those characters to mobile games,
Yeah.
and you see them pop up in like every single gacha game, right?
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
Yeah.
I'm guilty of buying some of them. Like that's where the money is, right? If
Yeah.
you look at Call of Duty and where they make their money, Call of Duty Mobile is killing it. Free to play Warzone, killing it. Skins, killing it. The $60 you pay and oh, how dare they sell me more and all this stuff. Like I agree with them. That's how it feels as a gamer, but like also recognize where the industry is moving, right? And
Mhm.
and seeing what's going on and don't let your personal judgment cloud an assessment of the industry,
Yeah.
right? And so I that's kind of the disconnect that I'm noticing is
Mhm.
that where all the dollars are going, where all the funding is going, like even a lot of the play to earn kind of the crypto game stuff, like so much money is going there.
Yeah.
Not just money, but like look, all the P2E games right now are just total shit. Like they're
Yeah.
so freaking boring, they're
Mhm.
awful. But what I've noticed as an insider is that the best publisher talent, the best developers, the game developers that are freaking legends, they're all moving to that space because
Yeah.
that's where the dollars are,
Yeah.
right? So at some point, somebody's gonna make a kick-ass game that's actually fun to play,
Yeah.
Yeah.
right? Will they have like really terrible monetization methods and stuff? I hope not. I really hope not because I don't like it. I don't like the idea that like you can pay money and you can be better than the other
Mhm.
person,
Yeah.
right? Um, I really hope that at least that competitive side stays sacred
Yeah.
because I
Yeah.
I hate that. I really do. But I also can make the assessment of like, the incentives right now are not such that maybe they stay that way. And I think there's a space for gamer backlash. And I think those things should happen because it keeps the industry in line to a certain degree. Um, but like when it comes to like cosmetics and skins, like the ship's already sailed,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
like you can complain that the skin costs too much money, and I remember the horse armor meme, but like, look, the industry's already moving in that direction. And like when people vote with dollars, they're actually voting to say, I want the skins.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's how people are voting,
Yeah.
right? This is less about Twitter arguing, but the vast majority of people are buying the skins and enjoying being able to play for free,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of my non-answer to the question.
That makes sense. I think if
That's
I
a lot of
can
insight.
hop onto that, maybe a bit into that Web3 stuff. We've obviously the space is very adverse to the idea because they associate maybe a large majority with like scammy pay to win or like scammy pieces of work, and so they're scared of that rug pulling style. So I can hear your water pouring.
Sorry. Maybe.
Wait, yeah, say that again. The scammy stuff versus the
Yeah,
rug
I
pulling
mean
stuff
that's
versus.
yeah. So like that, it's just adverse, right, in the space, and I feel like there seems to be better ways, or people thinking about better ways to do these things. I don't know how good of an example G2's Samurai Army is, for example. It's like, it's a membership club, but you could say they could have just done it like C9 Stratus, right? in that sense. So why is it an NFT? But at least there's like a more like community-led element to it. It would be good to get your perspective. I know you're a big fan. You have a Azuki NFT, PFP, calling you out a bit. It'll be good to get your perspective on like if you believe like a lot of like you said, a lot of esports teams are moving it in that direction. Where do you see perhaps actually maybe not Gen.G, I don't know if you can reveal that information. Where do you see a good way of moving into that direction is, if you have any insight?
One of the reasons why I thought it was so funny. This is more my personality. Is I knew that I had to understand this space as quickly as possible, right? I'm not doing my job as a CEO of an esports organization if I look at the biggest sponsorship deals that allow us to get the best players and not understand the space, right?
Yeah.
Like, so I was like, all right, this whole Twitter PFP thing popped up. For me, I'm like, I'm gonna dive headfirst into it to like learn more about it, right? That way I can make a smarter decision for the organization, right? And
Yeah.
I remember even when I switched to the profile, like I get a lot of people like hating it on like replies and stuff, and then I also had a lot of people DMing me being like, do you not understand what that'll do for your followers, and like your like following on Twitter is like it's gonna be really hard for you to grow your followers. And I was like, my job isn't to grow my followers.
Yeah.
My job is to understand why people are angry, understand the benefits of what communities are building, and like understand the space more, right? So that I can make a smart decision for the organization, right? So for me, it was kind of like an alpha test or a beta test of like, hey, this is what we should expect if we move in this direction.
Yeah.
And here's the support that we expect from the crypto bros. And one thing that I really learned really quickly was that a lot of crypto bros are making the mistake of a lot of crypto bros are gamers themselves,
Yeah.
right? But so they think, but the problem is, so most crypto bros are gamers, but most gamers have zero care about crypto, right?
Yeah.
They can't even afford to buy like one ETH, right? Like
Yeah.
it's so, but that it's kind of like a fallacy in the logic of these crypto people to think that like because I'm a gamer and I love crypto, if I just tell all these gamers they're gonna love crypto too, like that's insane. It doesn't make any
Yeah.
sense,
Yeah.
And you know, it's kind of like I'm Korean and I love Mexican food, so every single person in Mexico must love Korean food. That doesn't make any sense, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of what we're seeing in the market. People are really forcing things without really figuring out like what the value is,
Yeah.
right? And like for me, I'm still trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
One of the more obvious ones is I would rather build something unique for the crypto community that does exist and has that overlap, right? And that's valuable for them, rather than trying to convert a bunch of gamers that don't care about this stuff to go and care about this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then on the other side, if we're able to get some of this money in, like with some of these sponsorships or stuff, I also want to try to green light experiences, content that we can't do without the funding and without the money, right? Like how can we level up our docuseries so that it's more Netflix level? How can we create more offline events and just do cool giveaways and do stickers of Chovy we mail around the world? Like I want to do more of that, right? So I think all the teams are trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
And I see a clear difference between, let's say, 100 Thieves and G2, who are, I think, actually trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
Versus a lot of the other ones are just they're not trying to get to the answer, they're just trying to collect the cash, right?
Yeah.
And that's the difference I see, is that like both can and should be criticized for moving into including us, for moving into the crypto space and the slew of problems that space does, where it does exist. But I also have recognized that there are teams that are trying to figure it out versus teams that honestly I don't think they're really thinking about it.
Yeah. I mean, it's the next funding stage for them, as opposed to trying to find a sustainable model with it, right? That's what it seems like. Yeah.
Cool. I've got like one question.
Cool.
When it comes to sort of building a community, what do you think the sort of key elements are to kind of retaining a kind of community of like a loyal base, for example, sort of consume kind of gaming based products? Like what do you see as like a good way to keep retention high in an industry where everyone is competing for attention?
You know, that's one area that we've been spending a lot more time on, right? And for us, we knew, given that, a lot of our players, especially in Korea, aren't that active on social media, don't have that kind of big following. They have big followings, but not in the traditional Western, I tweet after a match and, everybody goes crazy kind of thing, right? It's just not the culture, right? So for us, building a community was much more about high engagement community that like really cares about what we're building about, rather than a brand that's for everyone, right?
Yeah.
So I make fun of I'm really good friends with the 100 Thieves guys, and dude, they're one of the smartest people in esports, and I always tease them because I'm like, dude, you guys are like Dave Matthews Band, and we're like the indie rapper selling CDs out of a trunk. We have a different business.
Yeah.
um and they hate that I always call them Dave Matthews Band because they want to be cool. And you guys, I don't know if you guys remember Dave Matthews Band, but it's like, what's like a pop group that like it's kind of lame to like them, but everybody loves them?
Oh, that's a good question.
Trying to think.
I think
Machine Gun Kelly? I don't know.
Yeah, sounds about
Jack
right.
Harlow. Jack Harlow. um, but I think that's kind of where I think about, like, one of the things that we've been spending a lot more time on has actually been Discord, right?
Yeah.
So we have a Gen.G Tiger Nation Discord, and we've been growing that pretty quickly, actually, right? Compared to social media and these kind of things where it's like you need players that are super active on social and content creators are super active on social, versus on Discord, it's much more like people that are really wanting to be part of the conversation,
Yeah.
and wanting to understand what's going on and have access and transparency into the organization,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I think that's one area that we weren't very good at, but as of last year, especially with me taking over, that's been my biggest focus. Is that, like, to me, building community is about conversation, right? And I'm not talking about a following. That's different.
Yeah.
It's very different from a community,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
A community is
100%.
about conversation and understanding who's that core community. What are they talking about? How are they thinking about things? Are you having the conversation to understand, like, hey, why did you make that move? Right? So, one thing I always try to promise is that, like, look, when we make controversial decisions, like, I'm gonna be right in the front and talk about it, right? As long as I'm allowed. There's no like crazy NDA or something.
Yeah.
Like, to me, that's something that I want to do and I want to build my reputation for, and I want to build our organization's reputation for,
Yeah.
right? And does that resonate with everyone? No, of course not, right? Like, the island boys have a huge following, right? They don't really have a conversation, right? Like, but for me, that's really important, and that to me is what, like, authentic conversation is about and authentic community is about. And that's an area that I'm really focused on. Please, if you guys, Gen.G Tiger Nation, just type that in chat or you Google and you'll find the Discord. It does ask you what our mascot is, and by the fact that our Discord server is called Tiger Nation, you
It should
Probably
be
goes get
pretty
it.
out
obvious.
Tiger.
Yeah. When I joined,
But
I
that
saw that.
to
It was
me,
pretty funny.
Yeah.
yeah,
Sorry.
and it's been interesting. We've kind of in it hasn't even been 1 year. It's been like a few months, and we already have more Discord members than the official LCK Discord, and even some of these top LCS teams that have been doing it for 10 years and 20 years. And I've been snooping around a lot of other Discords, and the CEO's never there. They're not in the conversation. And I'm just like,
Wow.
I like the fact that we're building something really unique and different.
Yeah.
And one interesting tidbit is actually even our League of Legends team is in the Discord now because they like are curious to see like what's going on.
Yeah.
They're not using their real Discord IDs.
Oh,
Yeah.
But
this is some interesting insider info, guys.
Message everyone.
and it's cool. Like I also think we have pretty strict rules in our Discord, but like I think that's also part of community is like you define the community you want to build,
Yeah.
right? Like for me, I didn't want to just adopt the Reddit gamer culture or the 4chan gamer culture or the equivalent in Korea gamer culture. Like I wanted to build our own.
Yeah.
The same way that every content creator has to build their own community,
Yeah.
right? And I think the rules are more strict because some sensitivities and stuff than how I normally am. But like, I like the fact that our community is a little bit different,
Mm.
and the rules are a little different. But like, I think that's cool because like other orgs can also build their own community and their
Yeah.
own rules, right? And
Yeah.
I think that's kind of the future, is
Yeah.
that it's less like everybody needs to meme on Reddit and that's the community, but it's more like this game, the gaming world and the esports world is so big. It's about building a unique community that now is more valuable than building a mass community.
Yeah.
Because even the monetization side, a lot of brands don't care about how big your following is anymore.
Yeah.
Like they want to just access and tap into unique communities,
Yeah.
and there's budget to do that,
Yeah.
right? Versus if you're FaZe Clan, it's much more about a mass spread out thing, right? Like I know we can't compete with FaZe Clan or Nate Shot, right? Like, just look at how cool Nate Shot is, and I'm like,
Yeah.
dude, this finance bro is not gonna have like 3 million followers, right? Like, it's never gonna happen, right?
Yeah.
But I like the fact that we're creating our own angle. We're doing unique activations and sponsorships. We have kind of unique content creators that do cool, interesting
Nemesis.
things.
I think a lot of people
Yeah.
are excited about him in chat.
Like it's, to me, that's a lot of fun.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
we're not gonna out meme and ratio people because we don't have that kind of following.
Yeah.
But at least our community enjoys what we do, what we try to do, and we don't always do it right, but that's kind of my philosophy on the difference between community and following,
Yeah.
and the difference of building conversation instead of just doing things that get reactions.
Yeah.
Right.
For sure.
Which is how you build a following.
Yeah. I think it speaks to that hypothesis that's kind of floating around on that 100 true fan or 1,000 true fan idea, where you can live like a good life or run a good company as long as you have those dedicated people. And I think that comes with building that community and building that dedicated base. I mean, a huge following, like you say, doesn't matter if no one's going to interact or purchase your merchandise in a very like business sense, right? So as long as you
That
have
is
those
one
people.
lesson I've learned from working with a lot of K-pop folks, is that the average girl group, even though they have incredible numbers,
Yeah.
doesn't monetize at all because they lack the hyper engaged fan base,
Yeah.
right? That I'm not talking like BTS is they're the fucking Beatles, right? Like,
Yeah.
sorry, I cursed.
The unique.
No, it's okay. Don't.
We'll
bleep that out later.
There's like BTS are the Beatles. They're freaking amazing, so talented, like changing the game. Like I love them, and hashtag army. But like a lot of other, a lot of like boy bands actually print a lot more money than even some of the top girl groups because they got that really hyper dedicated fan base, right? And to me, it's one of the reasons why we actually worked really closely with more of the Korean hip hop side, because I see a lot of similarities in our industry. And when I first came into esports, everybody was like, just do the K-pop model, and I was like, number one, our guys do not look like K-pop idols, and they don't want to be in front of the camera because they're too shy. Like, this is not the K-pop model that's going to work. But with the hip hop model, I thought that was interesting, where all of our players love Korean hip hop, especially in Korea. We also saw a similarity where they have huge impact in terms of audience, but they hadn't figured out how to monetize that impact yet.
Yeah.
And so, to me, that I thought that was a really interesting parallel, and that's one of the reasons why we worked with Jay Park, and the All In music video was because I just wanted to like pick his brain on how he's thinking about the business, the industry. He recently just sent a gift of his soju brand to Chovy for his birthday, which is kind of cool.
So cool.
But that's kind of one thing that I really like, is like finding other industries and finding parallels, and try to recognize those patterns and really learn
Sounds
from
like a
each other.
consultant.
Exactly.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I think we're out of time. Not sure how much
Cool.
we have left.
No. I probably got one last question or anything,
Okay.
then I gotta hop. But
yeah, sure. Maybe just generally then, like, specific to Gen.G, how do people get involved? How do they reach out if they want to work for you, or how do they contribute, whether it be through community, managing Discord, moderating Discord, that type of stuff, or being on the forefront of thinking?
Yeah, basically, I love when somebody reaches out and they have a portfolio, right? Because it shows they put in the work, right? And then I'm just so excited to give advice. And so I guess my number one tip that I have for everybody here is first figure out what you want to do. Figure out the direction.
Yeah.
Then start building, right? Be a builder, don't be a talker, right?
Yeah.
So with social media, start a meme Twitter account. If it's content, start editing content, have a portfolio. If it's finance, like start analyzing, the follower rates of different orgs and growth rates of different orgs, and like have something that you say, hey, I really want advice on how I can start my career. Ask for advice, don't ask for a job or an interview.
Yeah.
Nice.
And basically say, hey, like, I put together some analysis of like, hey, here's how like different orgs are doing and how they're growing, and here's some opportunities that I see. If you're a consultant, or if you're like, here's kind of the Discord channels that I moderate. Want to get my feet wet and start being a mod for your Discord. Here's some memes that I created that you can use next time for your social media, whatever it is, right? And then I'm just so excited because like I see like the future of the industry and those kind of folks, right? And so that would be and like, look, not especially in London, like you guys probably aren't fans of ours, especially because we just lost a T1, but it was only 80% of the roster, all right? So it didn't have ruler.
It's unlucky.
But like, this goes for everybody that I talk to across the industry, across all the teams. And the other advice I would give: esports is freaking small. The monetization isn't there yet. A lot of teams will go bust. Gaming is a huge industry, and the talent skills are completely transferable into esports. So look at gaming. Like, that's where the jobs are. That's where the growth is. And be a little bit more open. Like, maybe the next mobile game will be the next League of Legends, right? Like, don't shut yourself off when you're just starting your career. Like, broaden that lens, especially if you're sure in your direction. Then it's kind of like the next time you're doing the reach out to Carlos, you're going to be like, hey, I'm no longer a uni student. I know I reached out then, you didn't respond back, but now I'm at this mobile game company. I manage their Twitter, and I've actually made it a little bit more fun instead of loot box.
Yeah.
And I really feel like I can bring you this kind of skill, and I'm still just as passionate about G2. And then all of a sudden, you probably skipped ahead of the line of everybody else, right?
Yeah.
So like, think more ahead about that direction and taking that next step.
Yeah.
Right. And because careers are long, man. Like I got this job because I played intramural League of Legends at Google, right? Like, who knew, right? So being directionally correct, making those next steps, reaching out with a portfolio, and building now and starting now.
Yeah.
Best advice I can give. And the last thing I'd say is there's a lot of growth industries right now and growth stuff that's happening. Just learn about it. Even if you hate it, just learn about why the thing that you hate and why it's growing so fast, right? And so for me, the example I would give is, it's, you can either be clueless about, the enemy if you hate it, or you can actually know more about the enemy than its allies.
Yeah.
Right. And for me, I would say, like, you want to be the smartest person in the room.
Yeah. Sounds good. I think that's a great note to end on. Kieran, I don't know if you have anything else to say.
I just wanted to say thank you. This is a really unique opportunity to be able to get like such a clear perspective on something that's always pretty much shrouded in mystery when you ask the average person to look it up. So I just want to say thank you for taking so much of your time out of your day to come and tell us everything about this.
And try to at least get a 2-1 on your grade.
Basic goal.
I think that's the expectation.
Oh man.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Look, I love what you guys are doing. Thank you for even thinking about me. I do appreciate it. Like, honestly, nobody cared about us like a few years ago. I really love the fact that people seem to give a crap about us now, and I'm happy to try to give back and help any way I can. So good luck to you guys.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much for
Thank you
making
so
the time
much.
again.
All right, guys.
And yeah, thanks everyone in the
Thank
audience.
you.
And yeah, thanks so much for tuning in. Bye everyone.
Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye bye.